it still looks sensational, doesn't it? The Lamborghini Aventador, even after 6 years, it still looks amazing on the road. And it's taken Lamborghini those 6 years to update it with this, the Aventador S.
The numbers are impressive: 740 horsepower, 509 pounds-foot of torque, a top speed of 217 miles per hour, and 0 to 62 in just 2.9 seconds. The list price is around £270,000, but most will roll out of showrooms at 300 plus. It's much more expensive than the McLaren 720S or the Ferrari 488 GTB. In terms of price, it's a closer rival for the other Italian V12 supercar, the Ferrari 812 Superfast.
Let's have a proper walk around the car. I want to show you the bits that are new and also remind you that this car is dripping with really high-end supercar equipment, lots of bits and pieces that elevate it above some of the other supercars. This exhaust is new, the kind of 3-element exhaust. It's also 20% lighter than the old item. We've also got 4-wheel steering, which is such an important point on this car. We'll come back to that later on. And Lamborghini have reprofiled the rear arch, so it now has this sort of Countach shape, which I think is a really nice detail. The tyres, by the way, are bespoke Pirelli P0s developed specifically for this car. This car's got the optional carbon pack, and of course it's still got Lamborghini doors. You've got to love Lamborghini doors. Let's have a look underneath the engine cover. There it is, look, the heart of the Aventador. That's what this car's all about, really. The 6.5 litre, normally aspirated V12, now revs to 8,500 RPM. It's got 40 horsepower more now, so it's up to 740 horsepower. The car's built around a carbon tub, of course, and it's also got super trick, race car style, inboard suspension with push rods. You don't get that on a 488. The ceramic brakes are standard fit on the Aventador S, and this front splitter is new as well. It's more prominent than before, and Lamborghini claims 130% more downforce, which sounds pretty good. They're not actually quoting any numbers though, so for all that we know, it's gone from 5 kilograms of downforce to 11 or 12 kilograms of downforce. That's not important really. What is important is that the car still looks sensational from that front 3/4 angle, so low and so wide. The cabin hasn't really changed much. It's still designed to look like the cockpit of a fighter jet. These toggle switches here, the flap above the engine start button. The steering wheel comes all the way out to your chest. I really, really like that. But there are some problems in here. There just isn't much storage space. And the seats, Lamborghini just doesn't seem to do good seats. These ones just don't have very much support. You seem to roll around in them too much. And in their lowest position, I just don't have much headroom. This whole infotainment system, it feels a couple of generations old now. It is a couple of generations old, although it does work. But the most important thing in this cabin now is the new Ego mode. Ego, it sounds strange in English, doesn't it? As though it's going to sit at a zebra crossing with the throttle pinned wide open. But in Italian, it just means me or I. It's the individual mode. And it finally means that you can configure the car the way you want it. It's a cool place to sit, this. It's a really, really evocative cabin. There are lots and lots of niggles in here, though. But all that really matters about a Lamborghini is that it's exciting to drive. The two key differences over the previous car are the 4-wheel steering and this new Ego mode. The 4-wheel steering is important because it should make the car feel much more agile at lower speeds. But the other big thing is that it's allowed Lamborghini to send more torque to the rear axle because the rear end is just so much more stable now. That should make the car feel much more agile. It's also meant that they can retune the steering so that it's more direct, it's sharper, it's more responsive.
That should help to overcome some of the criticisms we had of the previous car. It should make the car more agile, livelier, and much more nimble. And then there's the Ego mode.
And I'm in Ego mode now, and I've got it set just as I like it, with the suspension and the steering in Strada mode, so soft, pliant suspension and the lightest steering. That's when the steering is at its best. You don't need any more weight in it at all. And I've got the drivetrain in sport mode, so we've got a sharp throttle, we've got snappy gear changes. This, for the road, is exactly how you want this Aventador S. It makes such a difference being able to turn the drivetrain up and still have pliant, nicely cushioned suspension. In the old car, I'd be skipping along this road, which is a relatively bumpy road, leaping out of my seat, scared that the car was going to jump straight off the road. It's actually coping with this very bumpy road really, really nicely.
The Aventador has always been about that crazy V12 engine, and it still is. It remains the centrepiece of the car.
It's wonderful, I have to say. Imagine a 6.5 litre engine that revs to 8,500 RPM. Or don't imagine, just listen. Woo! I don't ever want to drive another turbo car after driving this thing. It's just the most amazing engine. It pulls so hard. It's got the most beautiful soundtrack wailing away. 740 horsepower, that's a massive number. But because this car is normally aspirated rather than turbocharged, you don't get that thump in the back that you get from a 488 or any McLaren. Do you know what? I just don't mind that. It doesn't feel as instantly explosive. So what you have to do is keep your foot in, chase that red line, and then the rate of acceleration just builds and builds and builds. Between 6,000 and 8,000 RPM, it just feels bonkers fast. Overall, this engine is so much more satisfying than a turbo unit would be.
The gearbox is still the Aventador's biggest weakness. It's an automated manual rather than a twin clutch or a traditional auto box. It's lurching indecisive in auto mode and shunty in manual mode. It just feels outdated now. Lamborghini could get away with this transmission back in 2011 when the Aventador was new, but not in 2017.
Let's think about how this car handles. Now, it's still 1,700 kilograms thereabouts with me and some fuel on board, so it's a chunky thing, and it's still really big as well. It takes up a lot of road. That's always been true of the Aventador, but with the revised steering and with the new four-wheel steer system, it feels more agile, more nimble, sharper than ever. You can start to get on top of the car, you can start to impose yourself a little bit on it, and you can really start driving it hard on a tricky road, whereas before, all you really wanted to do was use all the performance in a straight line and then just sort of potter around the corners. But in this thing, you do start leaning on it and getting right on top of it and using as much of the grip as you can. When you stick it into a tighter corner, it's got really good balance. It doesn't feel understeery at all. It feels very, very positive on the way in. Four-wheel drive system, so we've got all the traction in the world. I've driven this car as aggressively as I can today, and there's just no way you're going to get the thing sliding or moving about, certainly not at road speeds.
The four-wheel steering and the new Ego mode really do make a difference. This is the best and most enjoyable Aventador to date, but the car still weighs more than 1,700 kilograms and it still feels huge on the road. These are fundamental problems that cannot be disguised by trick technologies. It may be better than ever, but it still isn't as engaging as the best in class. There's so much to adore about the Aventador S, the soundtrack, the styling, the wonderful V12 and the sense of theatre, but as a driving device, it's still second best.